Welcome back everyone. Last time we talked about all the classic Mega Man games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. We made 6 of these on NES, but on October 29th, 1988, the Sega Genesis/Mega Drive came out. This changed everything as now consumers had newer consoles with better graphics than the last. After the success that was the Genesis, Nintendo came out with the Super Nintendo, so all of Nintendo's AAA titles transferred to Super Nintendo. Mario, Zelda, and Metroid all came to the Super Nintendo were better than ever with more impressive graphics to boot. Meanwhile, the Blue Bomber still on old hardware. I can excuse for not being on the Super Nintendo since maybe it started development before the Super Nintendo was out, but by 5 and definitely 6 there was no reason for them not to be on the Super Nintendo. Critics at the time also thought so as they saw 4, 5, and 6 being redundant. The Mega Man series needs something new, something that would take advantage of SNES hardware. Oh, wrong video. What game are we talking about again? You think so would be a game changer, but what I could tell it wasn't in terms of family section. Well, number one, this game was made in 1995 when the PS1 was already out. It was pretty late to the party. But regardless, I found this game pretty good, honestly, but it's just short of greatness. We're talking about how this game plays, it's pretty much the same as the other 7 games, so no use in repeating myself. But something new to talk about is the art style. Rock and everything else has gotten an upgrade now that we're on the Super Nintendo. Everything is 16-bit, making it so that even by today's standard this game looks incredible. Not to take away how great I think this game looks, but has anyone ever noticed that the sprites take up way more space on the screen? Not a huge deal, but from marathoning basically all of the classic games, which has small sprites, then going to 7 with its huge sprites, it just made everything feel more heavy. How about the level design? Well, I think it's pretty superb. A lot of different gimmicks at play here, like how in Fuse-Man stage, there's ice physics, or in Cloud-Man stage, there are invisible platforms are only visible at certain distances. But the thing that makes this game stand out is the amount of stuff you can collect in this game. This is where we get some X influence here. Each stage has its own different upgrades, like how in Burstman, Freeze-Man's, Cloud-Man's, and Jugman's levels there are these plates that spur out Rush. You then get the Super Adapter, which is a combination of a flying and power armor from 6. You can even have it to where it has homing properties. You can get different rush abilities, specifically the new one, Rush Search. You can even get Pro Man's shield by fighting him, which by the way, this is really cool. He's not just jumping and shooting, he's using charge shots firing at different angles, which makes it a pretty cool boss. But I suppose we should talk about the story. So if you saw the last part, you understand that I've practically given up on expecting classic Mega Man to have good stories. But hey, maybe this one will be good? So one thing I forgot to mention is that in 6, Mega Man wrestles Riley. Shocking, I know. So 8 robot masters created by Dr. Wily bust Riley out of jail. This is where we meet new character base and his companion Trouble. He appeared 2 more times before it's revealed that both of them are Riley's creations. I feel like we wanted to show a new side of Mega Man in this game, something he is frowning in a sprite and looking at his dialogue. He doesn't seem too happy to be doing this for the 7th time. But there's no cutscenes besides the beginning, middle, and end, and what doesn't help with that is the below average English translation. But to get to the truly awfully translated scene, we have to get through the castle stages, which are pretty forgettable in my opinion. My favorite part is when you fight Bass using the Super Adapter and you can fight him with the Super Adapter. But just because of the boss fights. This is the first classic Mega Man game where I even care enough to fight some of these guys with Buster only. Buster only, some of these guys are pretty fun. Jumping over the bubble things from Burst Man, dodging lightning from Cloud Man, making sure you don't get grabbed by Shade Man, is really fun. Unless you bring weakness to these fights, in that case they become jokes. But speaking of boss fights, the final boss is very pulverizing, and when I say final boss I mean the second phase. So here are a couple tips. Try to bring as many Eatings as you can. You can buy them or find them in Fuse-Man stage. They got at least one weapon energy tank. Second, if you battle a game like me, you can never dodge these herbs. Try to get hit by the yellow herbs. They don't freeze or burn you. And third, know that you can angle right coil up and down. For all these tips, you should be able to beat this boss after a couple attempts. After the boss comes probably the worst translated scene in a Mega Man game. Mega Man, this 10 to 12 year old boy, is actually about to shoot Riley. In Japanese, Rock only tells him he won't follow his first tricks. Riley only asks if he could shoot him, not that he had any intention to. In the English translation, we have Rock ready to kill Riley, and when in the other 5 games, he's either let him go or had his hands tied. But yeah, at least the ending is really cool. With him walking away from Riley's burning castle, not bothering to look behind him. I thought Mega Man 7 was a pretty good game. Currently not one of my favorite games of all time or anything, but I'd say I'd play it again. I love Mega Man 8. I played this game 2 times. Once on the Legacy Collection, and another time while using an emulator to emulate the I totally paid for Mega Man 8, bought a PlayStation 1, and hacked my PlayStation 1 to play Japanese games. Totally. There is a Sega Saturn version, but I can't get my game working on on a real Sega Saturn hardware. So, needless to say, those plans fell through. The only difference is that Woodman and Cutman are bosses in this version. But the PlayStation also has better sound quality and better effects quality. And from the looks of it, Woodman and Cutman's bosses are so easy anyways, so yeah, just stick with the PlayStation version. Which the PlayStation version is actually the version that the Legacy Collection uses. But to start off, we kick into this game's soundtrack, which is great. This game was on a console that used discs instead of cartridges. Meaning real instruments could be used, it would just be a little compressed to fit on the PlayStation disc. Even with it being compressed, I still think it gives us probably the second best soundtrack so far. How the stage of every music plays over. Slick transition, I know. Well, I think the level design is also great, even better than 7's, or dare I say, is better than 4's. Mega Man 8 puts you in a variety of scenarios, like getting on an electric snowbird, or riding a raft down a lava river. It even challenges the players on how well you can use Thunderclaw. You're always given something new and fresh in these stages. And since there's 2 acts to a stage, you have a learning scheme in between, it never feels too overwhelming. I'd be lying if I said all of them though. Tinkerman's level has these long auto-scroller segments, where you fly Rush's back and shoot down flying enemies. It got even worse where I missed a screw on my Undom mod playthrough, and so I had to backtrack and do this section again. With the exception of Search Missile, I can find use for pretty much all of these. If not for combat purposes, then for platforming. The ball can bounce off walls, and while probably not intentionally, you can do this technique called the ball jump. Tornado Hold and Thunderclaw are usually used to reach hidden areas. Flash Bomb and Flame Surge hit multiple times. The Astro Crush pretty much screen nukes. And lastly, the Ice Wave hits multiple times while hitting enemies close to the ground. There are screws that you can find in each stage, which adds depth in my opinion. At 8, you use the screws that you collect in stages to buy different upgrades, like Charge Shots and the game Knockback. I actually like this shop system because of how limited it is. There's a total of 30 screws and only 30 screws, so you can't get everything. Like this, considering it kind of encourages experimentation, but I can see why some wouldn't like it. But seeing how overpowered you become by the end of the game, I can kind of see why they limit how many screws you can use. Now that we're done with going over gameplay, we can finally talk about the story, which I actually kind of like. So this robot named Duo and this evil robot are fighting. Duo is able to defeat him, which spreads evil energy around the planet. Riley then gets a hold of his evil energy and once again reprograms 8 robot masters to do his bidding. Mega Man then meets Duo, and together they stop Riley and Duo goes away in the end. Yeah, it's not like higher or anything, but I can at least appreciate some effort going into it. I also really enjoy the anime cutscenes, especially the intro, which it feels like a celebration of the series up to this point. But I've been being around the bush. We all know what everyone thinks about when talking about Mega Man 8's cutscenes.
I'll crush you! I'll make a popsicle of you!
No! But I've never seen this type on Earth.
Is Dr. Wily?
That's a good question.
Look, I'll defend many things about this game, but the English voice acting isn't one of them. Most line deliveries feel lifeless, with the same names in a weird way, and the voices just are off for most of these guys. I think Ruth Mary Drummond is actually the best actor here, which isn't exactly saying much. I prefer for a 10 to 12 year old boy to sound like a 10 to 12 year old boy, and not like a grown man like how he does in 11. Granted, it isn't entirely the voice actor's fault, directing also seemed very spotty too. In an interview with Ruth Mary Drummond, she actually revealed that she didn't even know that she was saying bass as bass.
Interesting pronunciation thing. It's another famous one in the opening cutscene on Mega Man 8. Mega Man is fighting a character known in Japan as Forte, but in America as Bass.
Okay.
But it's pronounced as Bass when it's voiced. So we were talking before this about how it was probably just that's what they thought the name was, because, it was a name change between countries. So it's like, yeah, BASS is Bass.
And I say that too, right? My voice.
Yeah, that one's yours.
I remember 100% thinking that was strange, but it wasn't spelled on the paper as BASE. It was BASS on the paper.
Which is something a voice director is supposed to tell you. Luckily, the undubbed mod exists. And on Legacy Collection 2 allows you to swap between the English and Japanese versions of the game. But getting back to the gameplay for a second, the castle stages are probably the worst levels in the game, except for Wily Stage 3. The first two Big Mac gimmicks from Frostman and Tanky Man stage, but at this point they were only used once. At least Stage 1 has a fun boss fight. Stage 2 is just boring either way because it brings back this auto-scroll segment from Tanky Man stage. And the boss fight is a giant snooze fest. Luckily you can just kill it with Astro Crash. The white floor is kinda cool besides the boss rush. The first phase is cool until you really see just go blur with Grenade Bomb. And finally, the final boss is pretty cool. It's a less difficult version of 7's final boss, ending the game really nicely. Overall, I loved 8. Every time I come back to it, it's super fun and an experience I enjoy. Not much more to say, so let's move on to our last game, Mega Man and Bass. If you look up, and I say this with massive air quotes, actual game reviewers' opinions, you get the idea that it's another Mega Man game, so it's good. But looking at quote-unquote YouTube critics, there's a high probability that you'd see some Call Me Johnny or Ant Dude's videos who are more on the negative side. Now, where do I stand is the question. I think this game is great. I'd put it above all the NES games other than 4, if I'm being honest. I suppose I should get the story out of the way, I guess. Dr. Wily creates a new robot called King, who eventually betrays Wily and plans to overthrow all humans. So Mega Man, who doesn't want him to take over the world, and Bass, who just wants to prove that he's better than King, team up to stop him. Although in gameplay you choose which character you want to play through at the start. Now that I said that, that's a perfect segue into the gameplay. The main feature of this game is that you can either play as Mega Man or Bass, or Rockman and Forte if you're playing this game in Japanese. Mega Man plays the same as he always has, while Bass can shoot in multiple directions, double jump, dash, and even can get upgrade when he merges with trouble. A common complaint I've seen flying around is that this game is designed around Bass and Bass only, when that's not true at all. Now yes, saying that Bass had all those advantages meant for it to seem like he's the overall better character, but the thing is that Bass excels at clearing stages, he has trouble fighting bosses as Buster only, and can't get to pathways that Mega Man can. Plus he doesn't get auto heal and Eddie revives. Mega Man also gets Search Rush. Mega Man also gets Beat, which can save him from pits. My guess is why it's portrayed as Mega Man just being the worst character is because players choose Bass first. Someone who has a way easier time dealing with the platforming, then switch to Mega Man, who is pretty much same when dealing with platforming, and conclude that this game is nigh unplayable with Mega Man. Man, I'm really on a roll with these segues, because it's easy to talk about levels where you do the platforming in. I find all of them really cool and unique. Imagine Man goes from traversing via trains, dodging spears to platforming on squares. Or there's multiple puzzles in Drill Man stage. And there's also this wide area where you can explore in Tengu Man stage. There's always switching up what you do, but just in case you did like the 2-act structure in 8, it feels more focused. I never felt like any of the levels were unfair or that it was impossible to get past with a character. The most I can think of is a section in Drillman stage, where the best I could do is just damage boost my way through it. The game also has these upgrades, but instead of hiding them in levels, you can buy them in Otter's shop. Some offer more health from item pickups, taking less damage from attacks, tips of roll, and using less special weapon energy. Since in this game, screws drop via enemies like 7, you can buy pretty much every single upgrade, but for some upgrades you have to choose between the ones you want equipped. But hey, what would a good Mega Man be without good music? Let's go back on the SNES, but music still has to have a sound font. But this music still is crazy. Enemies drop bolts like in 7, but if you're a fan of 8 screws, well, there's something here for you. Most of these disc thingies are hidden in the stages. But this gives description on Robot Masters. For example, did you know that Plantman is prone to depression because he is a perfectionist? I did collect them all because 1, I'm not interested, 2, I've already been holding off this video for a long while. But hey, if you're into that thing, go nuts. Now, let's get to the King stages, which get a lot of hate, but if I'm being honest, I look for more from the castle stages in 3 and 8, and from more memorable from the castle stages in 5 and 6, and at least once Lightly is revealed as the true ruin of the game, it doesn't make you do 3 more castle stages without a refill, like 4, 5, and 6. King Stage 1 is a pretty solid stage. The other thing I don't like about it is that you can dive to the boss if you don't jump off at the right time. King Stage 2 is probably the worst stage in the game, but honestly I don't even dislike it. This stage forces you into 4 bosses in one stage. The 3rd and 4th bosses are fine, it's the tanks that I have a problem with. The first one is really boring, as the taking is really slow and it takes a while for it to go down. The second boss can be pretty frustrating, as you have to jump on platforms with a bottomless pit. And keep in mind, if you mess up, that's insta-kill death. There's also flash bombs that right out the screen. On top of that, there's this fist attack that destroys platforms. May I remind you that there's a bottomless pit below you at all times during this boss. For both of these tanks, if you die, you have to respawn at the beginning of the stage, which is very frustrating considering I'd rather practice the boss I keep on dying to, not the stage where I can beat, where there's a possibility that you can get hit a lot. The bosses against King are pretty mid though. The first one you can beat with a lightning weapon, and the second one is really easy. King Stage 3 is probably the best King stage. It's a boss rush stage, but opposed to just having 8 pros in a room, you actually go through a level. And there's really no threat of you not being prepared since the game gives you plenty of pickups. But you finally get to the final boss of Wily. It's a pretty good mix of 7 and 8 final boss. For completing the final boss, you get an ending cutscene of the character that you're playing. Mega Man gets a letter from King saying he's okay, and Bass mocks Wily for even thinking he would need another robot besides him. Overall, I found Mega Man and Bass pretty fun, with pretty good over-designed special weapons and art style. Something I can say about a lot of games I played today. I really enjoyed all these games as they evolve the formula as opposed to just being the same game again. I know that all 3 of these games get a lot of scrutiny for trying something different, but hey, I guess if you never try something different, you never know if it works, right? But next time we'll be finishing the classic games with 9, 10, and 11. Hope to see you all there. My name is Spinball Productions, signing off. And the Mega Man series needed something new. Something that would take advantage of the from walking away from Wiles, but special weapons are pretty good too, with the exception of Search Missile. With the exception of Search Missile, I can find a use for pretty much all of these, if not for combat purposes. With the exception of Search Missile, luckily the Undob. The second boss can be pretty frustrating, as you have to jump on these bottomless platforms,